Welcome to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast, your guide to future tech trends and innovation in a language you understand. Now, over to your host, Neil Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast. The start of 2019 has been a little bit crazy, hasn't it? With CES in Vegas back in January, and February was all about MWC, the mobile conference in Barcelona, where 5G and foldable phones dominated all the headlines. But here in March, I wanted to try and get back to how tech can make a real difference. So today I invited Adam Medros onto the podcast, and he's the President and Chief Operating Officer at edX, which is essentially a non-profit online learning platform backed by MIT and Harvard. So I invited him on to my Daily Tech podcast, and Adam is passionate about the power of education and the impact it can have on today's evolving technology landscape. And he also has a fascinating backstory too. I mean, in a former life, he was the SVP of Global Product at TripAdvisor and was one of the key members of the team that helped the company scale to a global, publicly traded company with 400 million monthly users and over 1.5 billion in annual revenue. So naturally, I'm really looking forward to this one. So buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way to Cambridge, Massachusetts, so we can speak with Adam Medros, President and Chief Operating Officer at edX. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure. I'm Adam Medros. I'm the Chief Operating Officer and President here at edX. edX is a trusted platform for learning. So we were founded in 2012 by Harvard and MIT. We have 20 million people learning on the platform and 140 institutions building content on the platform.
Fantastic. And like you said, that edX is a huge non-profit online learning platform backed by MIT and Harvard as well. But for our international audience, can you just help maybe set the scene and tell them not only what edX is, but also what you guys do differently and what you stand for and what you guys believe in?
Yeah. What's great is that edX is actually being used by millions of international learners as well as learners in Western countries, the United States. 77% of our users come from outside of the US. And what we are is a platform that enables the best educators in the world, high quality education institutions, and some industry partners who are exceptional educators as well, like Microsoft, to put university quality courses online and enable people to take a course, earn a micro-credential, such as our MicroMasters program certificate, or increasingly work their way all the way to a full online master's for an incredibly disruptive price of, oftentimes below $20,000.
And already this year, when we're browsing the tech headlines on the internet, it's CES in Vegas with consumer technology, and last month was the MWC, the mobile conference in Barcelona, about foldable phones. But what I love about what you guys are doing is you're making a real difference through education, and that is where the real value is. So, I mean, can you tell me a little bit more about the power of education and also the impact that it can have in today's evolving technology landscape?
Yeah, that's a big question. I have a number of thoughts about this, so I'll try to stagger them. I mean, one is technology topics and issues and trends come and go, but I can't think of a single year in my life where education has not been a topic. Right? It's a topic for everybody around the world. It's something that people deeply care about. It is the key to economic prosperity and economic opportunities. And so, deservedly, education should always be at the forefront of us thinking about how our society is going to be more just, more capable, more competitive, how our jobs are going to evolve. So I think big picture, right? Education is a massive topic. What is absolutely truthful in the world of technology and in the world of business or economics or global competition is that the world is getting more global and it's getting more competitive. And the cycle time of industries, the cycle time of technology evolution, the cycle time of skills that workers need to build is getting faster and faster. And so I think for the first time, really, in decades, the reality is that our traditional education system simply can't keep up with the needs of a global workforce and the needs of a technology-driven workforce. And so I think that means a couple things. It means, one, we need to like look at education the same way that we have looked at fundamental technologies and ask, what can we change? How can we transform education and keep all the wonderful parts, right? We have incredible educators across the globe in our universities, people who care deeply about teaching as a craft, people who care deeply about research, driving new ideas, and people who care deeply about teaching people not just like hands-on skills, but how to think about the area they're going to work in, how to think about the problems they're trying to solve. The real question is, how do we do that faster? How do we do that, more on demand? How do we do that just in time with the evolution of the problems that businesses are seeing? And so 10 years ago, 15 years ago, nobody talked about data scientists, right? And now go to any boardroom and you will absolutely hear a conversation across all industries about how they do not have enough data scientists. They do not have the pipeline and the capacity of knowledge workers and analytically driven, technology-capable workers that they need to compete. So the only way we're going to solve that is by building more of them and finding ways to build them more efficiently, more effectively, and faster. Now,
one of the problems I've talked a lot about on this podcast recently is the speed of these emerging technologies and how difficult it can be for educators to keep up with it. In some universities here in the UK, we've got kids studying at university, and by the time they leave, their skills are out of date when they're trying to fill these positions that are left empty at the moment, especially around AI, machine learning, blockchain, and developing decentralized apps, for example. So how challenging is that for you?
Yeah, I think that's challenging for everybody. Yeah. I look at it as an incredible opportunity, though, where we get to ask the question of, how are we going to solve that, right? And I personally, I don't believe, the death of the university is upon us, right? Like, I don't believe that traditional education is going to go away or is going to suddenly, go bankrupt. Yeah. But what I do believe is that we have to build an expectation in our economies and in our workers and in our students that they're going to have to learn continuously. And the only way that's going to work, right, is if we sort of bite-size that learning. We give them strong foundational skills when they're full-time students, right? When they're growing up, they're learning, basic technology skills. They're learning basic logic and algorithm skills, even if we don't call them those things. In addition to all of the things that we think are important to build, just good humans, the humanities, languages, working with other people, all those kinds of things. All of that's critical. But once they get into college and into the workforce and into their careers, we've got to build a greater sense of continuously upskilling and reskilling as workers. Because the fact of the matter is, anybody that came out of college when I went to college, right, what they learned about computer science and analytics and all of these things that we're talking about, that it's not something that they are going to be able to like maintain a 50-year career on. And so they're going to have an ability to go back to the well and expand on those skills. And everything we've talked about, blockchain, data science, computer science, leadership skills, all of those are extensions of knowledge areas that have just been built over practice over the last 100 years.
And there has been a lot of information and news stories about jobs disappearing and technology creating but what we don't hear about enough is how technology is creating a wealth of new roles that pay very well and are currently sitting completely unfilled. But do you see that as more of an opportunity than a challenge?
For sure. I think I don't know the don't remember the exact number here, right? But there's been this conversation about how there simply is not enough computer scientists, right? Computer software engineers in the pipeline for all the demand there is for jobs, right? Yeah. And so if you look at that simply as a fundamental problem of supply and demand, you would say like, well, the market's going to correct for that, right? Wages will go up, more people will enter, but you have a 4-year, 6-year lag in the system to build that. And by the way, you have a deeper problem, which is there are not enough computer science educators in colleges nationwide in the US, globally in the world, to educate all the students that we need. So fundamentally, we're going to have to do something different, right? We're going to have to accept that the way we teach computer sciences, as an example, right? And there's lots of other examples. The way we're teaching this future crop of workers is going to have to be different.
And speaking of doing something different, I mean, edX stands out for me because it owns no universities and no courses. Its businesses being the stage of which educators, students and employers connect. So can you tell me more about why you think delivering for consumers at scale, that's going to actually be the revolution that happens in this industry?
Yeah. My background, I've worked for a number of different, what I would call sort of platform companies, right? And I think the common thread with a lot of them is this idea of taking the different sides of a marketplace and connecting them in a more transparent and more efficient way. And I don't think education is any different. So we're not cutting anybody out of this mix, right? We're not cutting educators out of the mix. We're not cutting students out of the mix. We're not cutting industry out of the mix. But I believe we're going to make that connection between what they want and what they need, between people entering and people exiting, and between the topics, what industry needs in terms of skills and topics, and what the market educators provide in educating against those skills and topics. I think we're going to make that more efficient, more transparent, and at greater scale. And so that to me really gets to this heart of, if you believe, as we were talking about before, if you believe that there are not enough computer scientists and computer science educators in the system to be able to fulfill the demand that is going to exist right now, let alone 10 years from now, then we're going to have to do something different, right? And that's going to have to be, how do you educate the first layer of computer scientists at scale? So a classroom that's not 100 people, but 100,000 people. And that doesn't mean that it has to be depersonalized, that it has to be, lowest common denominator. It means that you can do certain things at scale, and then you can specialize in smaller and smaller numbers. When we look at fully online master's degrees, right, a traditional master's at a college campus might be 50, 75 students, right? Well, now we're talking about full online master's degree programs with 1,000 students in it. That's a order of magnitude scale in something that is able to push, careers forward, economies forward. I just think thinking about that order of magnitude scale is the way you solve some of these problems.
And I've also got to ask, is there anything that really excites you about the role that technology is playing in education right now?
For sure. There's actually some really interesting research that is at the heart of the edX platform. So some great research that has been done by some of our educators that we work with at MIT that actually showed that if you teach if you go to a lecture, right, you put a student in a lecture, they listen to a 30-minute lecture, and then, you do that 3 times a week, and then after 2 weeks you have an exam. Their recall on that material is okay, but not great. And it's very dependent on their ability to sort of basically study the material and refresh the material on a regular basis. The edX platform, when you're taking a course on edX, and every educator can build their course the way they want to build it, but the platform is designed to encourage people to do a lot more spaced repetition and recall, right? So what you typically see in an edX course is something like 3 or 4 minutes of lecture or material being presented, and then a small quiz, right? To give you a sense of whether you are, understanding the material, to get you to think about it and recall it and test on it. And the beauty of that is like, if you don't do well on that recall after 3 minutes, rewind, right? Yeah. And do it again. And the ability for a learner to sort of self-assess and self-pace and really understand the material that is being presented in a traditional lecture format, I think is much more powerful on a platform like edX than it is in a traditional setting.
Absolutely. And just to wander slightly off topic for a moment, I read a great tweet of yours recently that I've got to bring up that both amused me at the time and equally resonated with me in equal measure. I think you said, there are few things I find more amusing than massive reply all vortexes. I mean, if you want to know what is truly in somebody's soul, see how they interact during one of these times. I mean, can you expand on your thoughts behind that tweet? Because I think it's something we can all relate to.
Yeah, I really do. I really love reply all sort of disasters. I can think of 3 epic ones that I've been involved with. One, and they're always about such great topics, right? So one was I think it was the year 2000 at Amazon, and it was a reply all thread at Amazon when, this is like 5,000 people working at Amazon, because they changed the soda machines from Coke products to Pepsi products. Right. And I think that one went on for 2 days. There was one at TripAdvisor that was about a picture of a double rainbow that somebody took. So they're just like, I think that you get this mundane topic that then turns into this living, breathing organism, and there's a cast of characters that come out in any one of these reply all things, right? There's the person who tells everybody how to use filters. There's the person who tells everybody to stop replying all, right? In all caps, usually. There's the person like me who tries to egg it on a little bit, right? And so I just think, you put people in these like moments of stress that they're not prepared for. And what you see is like their real personality come out. Can they take a joke? Can they ignore a stressor? I love them. The thing I'm actually sad about is that I'm worried that technologies like Slack are going to make them irrelevant.
Oh, I'm so with you. I'm exactly the same. I'm the guy that will try and egg it on a little bit as well. I think we should also mention for everybody listening, because you were at TripAdvisor, you were a part of the publicly traded company with 400 million monthly users and over 1.5 billion in annual revenue. And the only reason I bring that up is we'll have many business leaders and startup founders listening that could be having a lot of questions about scaling fast. So is there any way you could share any advice or insights on dealing with scale or hyper growth?
Yeah, that was an amazing experience for me, and one I'm really proud of. Not just because I felt like I was part of like fundamentally changing an industry, but I got to work with amazing people and incredible people in exactly what you said, scaling a business from 35 people to 3,500 people. Yeah, some of the insights I picked up there, and some good habits and some not so great habits, but was a real push towards speed, right? And I don't just mean TripAdvisor had this motto, speed wins, and it wasn't just like go fast all the time. But what it was trying to like ask, could we learn something a little bit faster, right? So could Steve Koffer, who's the CEO and founder of TripAdvisor, talks about this a lot, which is the idea of 404 testing, right? So we, in the early days of TripAdvisor, less so when we got bigger, but in the early days of TripAdvisor, we would sometimes do a 404 test. And a 404 test was somebody would say, wouldn't it be great if we had this feature? And, you could go do a whole bunch of user research and ask people and model out, what that feature might yield. But the biggest question would be like, well, would anyone use the feature? And so we would do things like we would put a button on the home page or on whatever page we thought where the feature would go with the messaging that we expected somebody to click on. And we just put the button up and see how many people clicked it. Right. And it would go to a 404. It would go to an error page because the feature wasn't built. Yeah. But in 2 hours, we would get a sense of, would anybody actually try to use this thing? And you wouldn't believe the number of great ideas that died because, we couldn't figure out how to get somebody to even open the door, right? To look behind the curtain and be interested in this feature. So there's lots of those things where you can like just cut the cycle time of experimentation where you can build V1 and then build on, that to build V2. That was one thing. I'd say the second thing I would tell people is I learned a lot about managing in growth. And, as TripAdvisor grew, and the thing I learned and still believe in a lot was that context was really important. Giving people context so they could make better decisions on their own was critical. Because, if you're an executive in one of those companies, you often have this very complicated but very broad narrative of what you're trying to accomplish. As you move down into the organization, that narrative gets narrower and narrower, and people have less and less context about how to make good decisions. And so not surprisingly, they are indecisive or risk averse or just unclear what we're trying to accomplish. The more you can bring transparency and context to the table, I think the better off people are.
Fantastic advice. And back to edX there and looking towards the future, is there anything about the road ahead for edX that you can share with me today, and also how it will continue to evolve with technology and equally the expectations of your customers?
Yeah, I think of two things that are really interesting about edX in terms of the technology future. So one is, we don't talk, it doesn't get mentioned a lot, but we're open source. And so figuring out how we can tap into the broader community for improvements to the learning platform, right? Whether that's pedagogy or whether that's features that are good for users, that to me is really exciting. I mean, I grew up in my time in TripAdvisor, I grew up running lots of A/B tests, right? And A/B testing has become incredibly, prevalent, just commonplace in the technology world, in the web world. But we don't talk about things like A/B testing pedagogy, right? We don't talk about things like experimenting with online platforms to figure out the best way to deliver a set of learnings or a set of material. And that's something that, with an open source platform and a platform like ours and enough people contributing and enough data, you can do some really interesting things to figure out what's the best way to teach somebody X, or what's the best way to present this material. I think tied to that is something that gets talked about in education all the time, which is personalized learning, right? And the role of AI, the role of adaptive learning, the role of data-driven customization for learners. And I think that's something that, we are simply scratching the surface on, but is absolutely going to come in the future to learners. Some way to assess what you know, and some way to assess where you need to get to, and building a custom path for you as a learner to get you there, particularly as we break down the traditional view of what's a course, right? What's a degree? Again, I don't think those things go away, but they're certainly going to morph to align with what industry and what workers and what people want in their education.
So if we have awoken the curiosity of anybody listening today with this conversation, can you just advise them where they can find you guys online, and maybe even contact a member of your team if they've got any additional questions?
Yeah, I mean, certainly you can find edX and the team on Twitter at edX Online. You can certainly send us a message there. You can send us a message on the platform, edX.org. You can find me at Adam Medros on Twitter, and you can send me your best reply all fiasco because I love hearing about them.
I'm sure you'll get a few of those. And one of the things that I love about what you're doing here is, on the surface, edX is an online platform from Harvard, MIT, plus more of the world's top universities and institutions. But when you scratch below the surface, you quickly learn that you've got no universities, no courses, and you're actually an open source platform daring to do something different by leveraging technology and encouraging that life of continuous learning. And that's what it's all about for me. So a big thank you for taking the time to come on and share that story with me today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.
As we discussed in the show, edX is a non-profit open source learning destination. But for me, I loved every part of their story, and equally Adam's too, on this podcast. And I love learning how it was founded by Harvard University and MIT back in 2012, but how edX's mission has always been to democratize and reimagine education by increasing access to high-quality education and creating an almost culture of continuous lifelong learning. And that is what it's all about. A culture of continuous lifelong learning, all made possible by leveraging technology. And that, for me, is so much more exciting than a new foldable phone, right? But that's just me going off on one again. Over to you. Please, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Email me directly, techblogwriter@outlook.com. Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, I'm easy to find, just at Neil C. Hughes. But the sad news, gang, is that I'm afraid we're out of time. But remember, kids, every day is a school day, and keep learning. But class is officially dismissed, so I will see you bright and early tomorrow with another inspiring guest about how they're leveraging technology to improve their industry or their business or make a difference in the world. But all that's left for me to say is a big thank you for listening. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thanks for listening to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast. Until next time, remember, technology is best when it brings people together.